If you would like to think of one of the most expensive things to do in your 20s, moving to London would definitely be up there. And when you start to factor in moving from another country, the costs, they definitely start to add up. When I moved to London from New Zealand last year, I would have loved to see a video breaking down exactly how much it cost. So I'm making just that. In this video, I'm going to cover exactly what it cost for me to move both before and after landing. These costs will be for just me as an individual, but bear in mind that I moved with my husband, so he was paying the same amount to move as well. Plus, as you guys know, I love a bargain, so I will sprinkle in some tips on how to offset your expenses or reduce your costs when you move. If you are new around here, my name is Jess. I am a Kiwi living in London. I share content all around moving and living abroad, as well as travel and all the food that I eat along the way. So if this sounds like a little bit of you, hit the subscribe button and stick around for much more of this. Far too cold to be filming outside this morning, but the things I do for the YouTubes. Okay, let's get into it. Costs before moving. So first up, obviously, you have the visa. In my case, I was applying for an ancestry visa, and this is one of the longest visas that you can get. So you think it would be just an application fee, which for me was £546, but not for the UK. You also have to pay an NHS surcharge for each year of your visa. And because an ancestry visa is 5 years long, I ended up needing to pay £3,303 for the surcharge, which is not cheap. On top of that, we also used visa assistance because I just really wasn't in the mood to mess all of the paperwork up. So my share of that was £195, and then for my direct flight to Manchester, it was £600. Other little bits were £55 for travel insurance, and then it was £205 for extra luggage postage. In total, £4,759 just to prepare to get on the plane to come to the UK. Ouch. And we hadn't even landed in London at that point. But there are a few ways that you can help to offset these costs when you're moving. The first is to investigate shipping or posting your suitcase over attaching it to your airfare. I found that this was about half the price as opposed to bringing it with me on the plane. The second thing to consider is that when you're moving, you will have a lot of money going in and out of your account, and you might have things like getting paid out annual leave from a job you're leaving. You might be selling a whole bunch of stuff. You could be getting a bond back from the place that you rent. And so these are ways that you can really quickly help to offset those lump sum payments that you're making for things like visas and airfares. Now let's talk about the costs when you arrive and settle in London. The first on the list is temporary accommodation. Now when you arrive in London, it is very likely that you will spend your first 1 to 2 months living in like a flat share or a sublet or an Airbnb or something like that. In my experience and with the people I've known who have moved here, it just takes that long to lock in a permanent place to live. To be on the safe side, I would budget about £2,000 for your first 2 months accommodation, just to give you a little bit of breathing room while you are trying to find your flat. Another thing you should think about is having 3 months worth of bills saved up. This is a recommendation I read in a blog post, and it was really, really valuable. So this is things like water, electricity, gas, and council tax. We love the UK's council tax. 3 months of bills for an individual person, I would budget about £600. Now we will talk about rent in London. I definitely need some coffee for this. Let's start with rental deposits. Now, this varies widely depending on your situation, but typically if you're an expat, you're moving to London to live pretty centrally in zones 1 or 2, and for this I would budget between £800 to £1,200 per person per month for rent. This is going to get you a room in a flat share if you are an individual, or sort of like a studio to 1 bedroom place for a couple. For these deposits, you will pay a holding deposit and a dilapidations deposit. That's what it was described as on my receipt anyways, and that will come to a total of about 5 to 6 weeks of your rent. So if we take the example of, say, the middle number of £1,000 per month, you will be looking at about £1,400 for your rental deposits. I live on a quiet street. Why is everyone driving their cars on a Sunday afternoon? I thought everyone was meant to be at the pub on a Sunday afternoon. Rent in advance. Yes, I wish I was kidding, but I'm not. and I found this out the hard way. So when you move to the UK, you don't really have a credit history or rental history locally. So quite often landlords or agents will ask for a certain number of months of rent in advance. Typically, that is 6 months. Especially if you're in the situation where you started a new job when you've moved and you were in your trial or probation period while you were flat hunting. So if we take the example we were using earlier of £1,000 a month for rent, you will want to times that by 6 and ideally have a lump sum of £6,000 on hand. Yeah, honestly, it's super dumb, but it is just the state of the London rental market at the moment, and I'm trying to be super transparent so that nobody is kind of caught out like I was. The thing is, don't let the idea of this scare you off, because I know a lot of people who have made it work without having to pay rent in advance, but when you do have access to a lump sum like this, it will give you a little bit more flexibility and probably help speed up your flat hunt search process. You're moving in budget. Now you can do this as cheaply or as expensively as you like, and it will totally depend on if you're going into a flat share, a place that is already furnished like a lot of places in London are, or if you're going into an entirely empty apartment like we did. I'd suggest around £1,500 for this, but you can easily find things on Facebook Marketplace, and also they have an IKEA here, so that definitely makes the whole furnishing process a little bit easier. Okay, let's look at the total. So it's going to be £11,500 to move and set up your whole life once you land in London. I'm not going to pretend that isn't an absolutely absurd number, but if you take out the rent in advance payment, you're looking at more like £5,500. I don't think saving money and London can ever really be said in the same sentence. There's that meme that says it costs like £50 just to breathe in London, and that is very, very accurate. But here are some ideas on how you can save costs when you first move and you're initially sort of settling down. So quite obviously, the number one way to reduce your costs when you move to London is to reduce your rent. And I know when you move here, ideally you want to be living in zone 1, 2 or 3. You want to be living close to where everything is happening. But if you want to move on a smaller budget, you can make that happen by living a little bit further out and commuting in. Number 2 is to skip the eating and drinking out when you first arrive and kind of save that for your like thriving London era. It is expensive to eat out and drink out here, but there are some amazing cheap eats you can discover in London. And in my experience, compared to New Zealand groceries, supermarkets here are so cheap. So for the first couple of months, pull back on eating and drinking out and make your food at home. My last tip is to just buy the essentials when you first move in. Just get the things you need to get by, and then make a nice big list of all the things you'd ideally want to have and shop these in the sales or get them secondhand and find them on Facebook Marketplace. I swear there are about 1,000 of those IKEA shoe cabinets on Facebook Marketplace. Do not buy them new. Now I'm going to give you my unsolicited advice on all the financial things you should know if you are moving to London or abroad. Basically what I wish someone had told me 12 months ago. Firstly, I would have a couple of months of living expenses saved up, so that's things like transport, food, etc. Companies usually pay monthly here, and so depending on when you start, it can sometimes be an awkward time and you could end up waiting maybe 6 to 7 weeks for your first paycheck. Save yourself the stress and just have a little bit of money in your back pocket for your living expenses. My second tip is that if you don't know how much it's going to cost you to live in London, watch a lot of those what it costs to live in London videos and find people who are in a very similar phase of life to you. People working in corporate, creatives, students. This will help give you a closer look at the day-to-day costs of living here. The third tip is to genuinely evaluate if your salary is going to cover your cost of living. It is very easy to romanticize moving to and living in a new city, but practically you really need to consider if your salary can cover living in a place like this. One way to look at this is moving at a slightly older phase of life. I moved to New York when I was 21 and I found it really difficult because I didn't have the years of work experience under my belt. But moving to London much further in my career, I have found it has been a lot easier. And when you move, depending on your background, your career can sometimes take a 1 to 2 year step back as you gain that international experience. When you move a little bit later on in life, it softens that impact. The very last one, and I will honestly preach this forever, please have an emergency fund. Please, please, please. Even with this very comprehensive list, things can still go wrong. For us, the case was not knowing that we would have to pay rent in advance, and the only way we were able to have that option was because we had an emergency fund to fall back on. So seriously consider this as part of your budgeting when you are planning to move. Guys, this has just been lovely. Thank you for being here. I'm sorry if it was a little bit of an information overload, but you can save it and come back to it, and hopefully it helps someone planning that big next step in their lives. Yes. Honestly, moving to another country is one of the coolest and most exciting things you can do, but best to go into it with your eyes wide open. And if you want something a little bit more lighthearted, check out my living in London vlog. I now have enough videos where I can link them on the end screen. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.